In the future, people live through robots, allowing them to avoid danger and maintain eternal youth and beauty. However, this way of life is about to face opposition. A company named VSI, led by a man called Lionel Kaner, has developed robotic body parts that connect directly to the human brain. This innovation allows humans to fully control and experience sensations as if it were their real body. Soon, this will lead to the creation of complete robotic bodies for those who are entirely paralyzed. The military quickly realizes the potential of robot bodies controlled by human brains, as this allows them to send robots instead of real soldiers into combat. After the military begins mass-producing these robots, they become affordable, and civilians start purchasing them. By using robots or surrogates, people can go out and enjoy the world without the risk of accidents or diseases. As an added benefit, they can always appear young and healthy. It doesn't take long for Congress to pass a law making it legal to live through surrogates. A few years later, surrogates are now the norm for living worldwide, except in some special regions where certain groups have rejected artificial life and choose to live as real humans. These people form a cult, led by a figure known as the Prophet, who preaches against living as surrogates. Today, a young boy is driving a luxury car, talking to his father and thanking him for lending him his surrogate. What the boy doesn't know is that someone on a motorcycle is following him. He heads to a club, dances with a hot woman, and then gets intimate with her in a back alley. Just as they're getting close, the man on the motorcycle shows up. The boy tells him to get lost, meatbag. But moments later, the entire alley is engulfed in a massive electrical surge. The biker tries to flee, causing a multi-car collision in the process. FBI agents Greer and Peters are called to investigate the crime scene. Upon arrival, they immediately notice something unusual. Eyes of both the boys and the woman's surrogates have been blown out, along with their memory chips. The boy's surrogate wasn't registered, but the girl's unit was registered to someone named Cameron. When they arrive to investigate the middle-aged man Cameron, they discover that he and his surrogate have both died, a scenario that's typically impossible. This leaves Greer and Peters puzzled. Greer, his surrogate, returns home, observes himself lying in the control chair, and then enters the charging module. Greer steps out of his control chair and heads to his son's room, filled with his son's toys and photos, but for some reason his son is nowhere to be found. His wife, Maggie, emerges from her room, and he asks her if she wants to take a break and go on a vacation. "You think about taking a break?" Maggie is enthusiastic about the idea. However, she realizes that Greer means they should go in their own bodies rather than with their surrogates, and she doesn't like that idea. "Can we talk about this another time?" Greer mentions that he feels like they're no longer together anymore. Maggie responds that they're together all day, but Greer points out that it's their surrogates that are together, not them. Maggie tells him that it's better this way. Meanwhile, at West San Diego Academy, a boy is found dead in his control chair. It's the same boy who was operating the surrogate during the earlier incident. FBI Director Stone orders everyone to keep the case details under wraps, as the public is unaware that injuries can occur while using surrogates. Greer reviews the last memories of the boy's surrogate and notices that the biker pulled out some kind of weapon just before the incident, indicating that this was a murder. They receive news that the deceased boy was named Jared Kaner, the son of the notorious surrogate inventor Lionel Kaner, who had tried to change the company's direction but was ousted by the board of directors from his own company, VSI. Greer and Peters arrive to speak with Lionel and discover that Jared was using Lionel's surrogate at the time of the murder. Lionel becomes highly emotional. "What is this?" Greer tells him that he understands how Lionel feels and reveals that he also lost a son. Peters is surprised by this revelation. Greer notes that since Jared was using Lionel's surrogate at the time of the murder, it's likely that the killer intended to murder Lionel, not Jared. Lionel realizes that he might have been responsible for his son's death and decides to sever ties with his surrogate. He is devastated. Greer and Peters arrive at VSI to question their vice president about the possibility that an attack on a surrogate could lead to the operator's death. "I just want to know how an operator can be killed by signals from a surrogate." The vice president and the company's lawyer seem defensive, insisting that this is impossible because fail-safes are always activated whenever a surrogate is about to be harmed, preventing the operator from experiencing any injury or even pain. Realizing they won't get any answers here, Greer and Peters head to the company's engineering department instead. They ask an engineer what could cause such damage to a surrogate. The engineer explains that it seems like the surrogate was overloaded. Greer asks if he's ever seen anything like this before, and the engineer mentions seeing some military surrogates with their eyes removed. Greer and Peters then visit a military facility to talk to a general about whether a weapon exists that can kill both a surrogate and its operator. The general dismisses the idea, saying that if such a weapon existed, he would know about it. As for the soldiers' surrogates, he reveals that they've been removing the eyes and main boards for inspection. Greer remains unconvinced. Peters discovers that the man on the motorcycle is named Miles Strickland, who was once arrested for robbery but released without punishment, suggesting someone in law enforcement is protecting him. She issues a warrant for his arrest. The FBI's surveillance unit tracks down Miles and his phone. When they arrive, they are greeted by Bobby Sanders, who informs them that Miles is currently being pursued by the police. Greer joins the chase while Peters stays behind. Bobby, a human who refuses to use surrogates, shows Peters how the surveillance unit can access every surrogate on Earth and immediately deactivate any of them for law enforcement purposes. He demonstrates this by noticing two people assaulting a woman in a hotel room. He instantly obtains an arrest warrant and deactivates their surrogates. Lets me disconnect anyone from their surrogate. Well, that can't be legal. Meanwhile, Greer is in a helicopter pursuing Miles when Peters warns him over the radio that he's about to enter a territory designated for non-surrogate users, where he has no jurisdiction. Greer ignores her and continues the chase. Just as it seems the police have cornered Miles, he pulls out the surrogate weapon, killing several officers. He fires at the helicopter, killing the pilot, but Greer unplugs from his surrogate just in time to save himself. Miles crosses into human territory, and Greer re-engages his surrogate, discovering that his helicopter has crashed. Greer continues the pursuit on foot in human territory, where the people mobilize against him. Greer finally catches up with Miles and demands that he hand over the weapon. "Give me the bag!" But just as Greer prepares to inspect the weapon, the humans arrive and shoot his surrogate. Greer wakes up at home, physically weakened. Before Miles's weapon could kill him, he unplugged, but he's still been hurt. Maggie arrives and takes him to a hospital in human territory. Miles wakes up to find his home being searched by the Prophet's followers. The Prophet demands to know where he got the weapon and who hired him to kill Lionel. Miles replies that he doesn't know, as the person who hired him never met him. They only communicated via phone. From the hospital, when Stone visits Greer, Greer wakes up. Stone informs him that he's been suspended for entering the human jurisdiction, which has triggered a conflict between the human zones and the surrogate zones. Greer won't receive another surrogate unless he's reinstated. Greer is discharged in his human form, and Peters sees him walk out of the hospital as a human after all this time. Greer feels incredibly vulnerable and anxious. Peters suggests he should get a temporary low-quality surrogate, but he refuses. Greer arrives in human territory and sees that Miles's funeral is taking place. He watches children playing and listens to the Prophet's speech about how those living through surrogates aren't truly living. This is the human condition. This is what gives life meaning. The Prophet also mentions that the time is coming when surrogates will disappear from the world. Greer approaches the Prophet and tells him about Miles's weapon, offering to do anything to get it back. The Prophet assures him that if he finds the weapon, he will contact Greer later. It is revealed that the Prophet has already found the weapon but has no intention of handing it over to Greer. Lionel contacts Greer, now using another surrogate. Greer tells him that Miles is dead, likely killed by his own people. Lionel says that the weapon Miles used is incredibly advanced and couldn't have been made by anyone in human territory. Another individual had hired Miles someone who could afford to spend billions of dollars on such a weapon. Lionel tells Greer to continue the investigation and seek justice for his son. He asks Greer how his son died, and Greer reveals that it was a car accident before surrogates became widespread. I can think of no worse tragedy than a parent outliving a child. Greer returns home to find a party in progress with Maggie's friends, engaging in some sort of surrogate drug activity. Maggie assures him that it's just some people her friends brought over and that she has nothing to do with it. Greer walks into his room. When he comes out, he finds one of the men trying to flirt with Maggie, causing him to lose his temper. He punches the guy, and everyone laughs at his attempt to hit a robot and ends up hurting himself. Greer storms off and Maggie follows him. She asks what he wants from her and he says he just wants her. She tells him that he already has her, but he responds that he wants the real her, not her surrogate. Maggie says that things have changed, but Greer insists that it's only because of their son's accident that she's been afraid to face the real world ever since. "I want the woman that's in that room, my wife." Maggie walks away. Meanwhile, someone breaks into Peters's house, kills her, and takes control of her surrogate. Greer discovers an old canceled contract between the military and VSI. He deduces that it must have been for the weapon. He confronts the general again, who admits that the weapon was indeed created by VSI with the intention of ending the war by killing all enemy soldiers' surrogates in one go. But when they realized the weapon disabled the surrogates' failsafes and killed the operators, they ceased production. Greer reveals that one weapon is still out there in human hands, and the general immediately orders action to retrieve it. Meanwhile, the Prophet hands the weapon over to his followers, instructing them to deliver it to Agent Peters. Greer goes to Maggie's office to see her and tells her that he's been thinking about their son. He says he just wants to be with her. Maggie says she's also been thinking about their son, and the only reason she's been able to face the world is because she hasn't really had to, thanks to living through her surrogate. Greer tries to get her to open up about it. "I can't stop thinking about him," but she refuses to talk to him any further, not even plugging back in. The soldiers launch an assault on the human territory in search of the weapon, opening fire on the Prophet. It turns out that the Prophet is actually a surrogate controlled by Lionel Kaner. Peters meets with Greer and reveals that Miles was actually hired by the FBI, meaning that Stone is corrupt. Greer confronts Stone, asking why he hired Miles to kill Lionel. Stone tries to turn the situation around, but Greer attacks his surrogate and uses his login credentials to access FBI files. Peters and Greer flee the FBI headquarters. As Greer goes through the files, they reveal that Lionel has been funding the human territories and their anti-surrogate efforts, which is why Stone and VSI wanted him dead. Peters notes that Stone needs the access codes for the weapon in order to use it, so they need to find those codes as evidence against Stone. However, as soon as Greer finds the codes, Peters crashes her vehicle, taking the codes and the weapon with her. Greer tries to chase her, but she is a surrogate and he is human, so it's pointless. Greer realizes that Lionel is controlling Peters' surrogate. He calls Bobby Sanders to warn him that Peters will try to contact all the surrogates and use the weapon to kill them, but Peters has already arrived and taken Bobby hostage. Stone confronts Lionel at the FBI, accusing him of being insane for inventing surrogates and then turning against his own creation. Stone reveals that he and VSI tried to kill Lionel because they knew he was working to abolish surrogates. Lionel uses the weapon to kill Stone, avenging his son. Greer arrives at Lionel's house, attempting to talk him out of his plan. Lionel insists that he never should have invented surrogates, that humans need to live like humans. Surrogacy is a perversion. It's an addiction. Greer warns him again that he's about to kill billions of people and will just become a murderer. Lionel argues that surrogates are an addiction, and to break that addiction, he needs to eliminate the addicts. He connects the weapon to all the surrogates in the world, and then takes a cyanide pill to end his own life. Greer takes control of Peters' surrogate, and with Bobby's help, disconnects all the operators to save their lives. The weapon is still connected and is about to wipe out all the surrogates. Bobby shows Greer how to save them, but at the last moment, Greer decides to let it happen. All the surrogates around the world are destroyed, forcing people to emerge in their true identities. Greer returns home to find Maggie in their son's room, and the two embrace passionately.